Okay, hey everybody, welcome to episode 9 of the Next Level podcast. I am here with my buddy Nader from NBDco, fellow New Jerseyan. Happy to have you here, man. How you doing today?
Good, good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. We were just discussing outside the booth that it's a bit muggy here in Brooklyn today. And when you're walking around and then you have to get on the train and then you start sweating through your clothes, it's just we're getting into like that summertime weather. And this is like the first day where I feel like I've really been feeling it. So yeah, that's what's going on over here.
Yeah, we're still in I mean, we're not that far away from each other, but over here in my area, where I'm like more in central Jersey,
Hmm.
and it's that mix of like it's either going to be really hot or like kind of cold. So definitely
Totally.
feeling that as well.
Yeah. Well, I know it well, man. Born and raised. So, but yeah, why don't you go ahead, do like a little introduction, let everybody know who you are, kind of what you're doing, how we know each other, like all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So, uh, you know, um, basically, I 5 years ago I founded NBDco, which is kind of just like a small sort of freelance sort of studio venture, where I was really trying to focus in on holistic brand identities. Um, and I think that kind of comes full circle, like when looking back at like, first of all, how we met and, the whole journey of, how I got into design in a way. Um, but yeah, so everything kind of came through music first, and then that's kind of how we met through Zach really, but at
Sure.
Relic Music, which was I thought a fun conversation that we had that night.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what was interesting about that is I feel like here in the city it's really easy to meet other creatives because it's so condensed. But I always got like as I kind of started dipping my toes into this world and like kind of transitioning as a professional into graphic design, it was like, where are all the people in New Jersey? Which is like
Yeah,
maybe like I don't know, New Jersey people are obsessed with New Jersey, so I'm always like, where is the design community there? I guess maybe felt really spread out or just like it's not very communicative. And
yeah,
yeah, when we met at that show at Relic a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, it's just so nice to like meet another designer who's based out of here.
definitely. Yeah, and I feel the same way too. For so much of my time designing, like I was I was always kind of like I haven't really met another designer. I started out in high school, kind of like through Microsoft Paint and stuff,
Sure.
and then like eventually transitioned to Photoshop and all that. And through that, like it kind of just felt like I was on my own path. And then I found like sort of like internet design friends through different like forums and things like that. But in terms of New Jersey, yeah, I always felt like there was something lacking in terms of a community. And like AIGA has a New York chapter, but they don't have a New Jersey chapter.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, I was just telling a friend this a couple weeks ago, where there was something that existed like maybe like 10 years ago or something like that. And I was so eager and I joined it, and I think it like lasted a year and it fizzled out. So
Yeah.
I hopefully there's like the rumblings of something where it can sort of grow back up again.
Yeah. That would be great. And generally, you know, from when you started in high school to where you are now, like what's the progression for you? Is there college in there? Where did you go? And then, where were you working up until when you decided to start NBDco?
Yeah. So, basically in high school, music kind of led the design sort of passion for me.
Hmm.
Because I always loved drawing as a kid, right? Like most of us do, but
Yeah.
um, I didn't really know where to take it. And once I started getting into like that like Microsoft Paint world and stuff, I had the idea of like maybe I could make something to sell. So I made a t-shirt brand with my friend. It was called Labyrinth, and we ran it for a couple of years. And the first run of stuff that we did was literally made in Microsoft Paint,
Yeah.
and went to a screen printing shop in New Brunswick,
Hmm.
and got like three different designs printed. And through friends, I ended up getting encouraged to go to shows with them. I had some friends in bands like Gray Lines of Perfection, which was like my friend Dave was the bassist of. And
Hmm.
he'd be like, "Why don't you sell our merch and you can also sell your stuff? And who cares if you're not a band? It's just like whatever."
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing that a lot. And through that, I ended up meeting a lot of different people, going to a ton of different shows, and experiencing a whole lot of new music that I wasn't aware of, and sort of like the community of musicians in the New Jersey scene. And that then led me into like, okay, like I want to do stuff for them because they need stuff. And so
Hmm.
through getting Photoshop and like Macromedia Fireworks, and which probably nobody remembers, but um, I was literally like, I think my first stint into like designing for somebody else was doing like animated GIFs and icons and like backgrounds for bands, and just kind of like approaching people and going like, "Hey, I love your band. Like you have this cool album art, or you don't have anything at all. Like, what if I could make something that you could put on?" And which I don't know. Again, I don't know if anybody remembers this at this point, but like a band's website used to have like a media page where you'd go and download like backgrounds for your desktop computer,
Hmm.
or your AIM icons
Yeah,
or
of
whatever.
course. I'm
And
old
so,
enough. Yeah, I remember.
yeah, so I literally got into doing that first, and then through high school, my art teacher told me about graphic design as like an industry because I didn't really even know what it was that I was doing. I just thought I was making like digital art essentially. And that's kind of like what opened up the door a little bit more for me to go like, oh, this is like a whole industry that I was kind of unaware of in a way.
Hmm.
Um, and then I started for, you know, college, I started just applying to schools that had like a co-op program sort of thing because I didn't know like how viable it was for me to become a graphic designer, and like what the industry entailed really. So I was like, I probably need experience somewhere else. And I think actually the first internship that I took, which I'm just remembering now, was with the Aquarian Weekly, which was like a music magazine in New Jersey.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's so funny the way you talk about New Jersey and the local scenes that used to exist there. I feel like it did foster a lot of almost like ancillary creativity because it really was like, I mean, in that same way, like that's how I know Zach is because he was in a band when I was in middle school, and like we used to go see him play because we knew other people in other bands, and you just kind of weave yourself into these little like scenes, which is what we used to call them and probably still do, but
yeah,
that's how you get started. Is you maybe decide you're going to be in a band. That's what I did, and then I started making a bunch of artwork for my own stuff, and then that kind of fizzled a little bit, and then I picked a different career path, and then you realize like, oh, wait a second, that was something that was kind of maybe the spark that starts all of it. And yeah,
yeah,
you're messing around in like MS Paint, like it's like crappy little drawing software, and then you find the tools that you actually need, and then it maybe blossoms into like an actual profession.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of like I said before, where it all kind of began for me, because like through that, and finding these bands and these people that have eventually became friends, One band in particular that um, like really got me started was this band called Dino Velvet from North Brunswick.
Yeah.
And through meeting them, they kind of, I think I was talking to them about like maybe their merch or something because I liked some of the designs that they had.
Hmm.
They're like, oh, our singer drew that one or whatever. And I was like, oh, cool. And then they were like, yeah, and he screen prints them too, or we screen print them ourselves. And I was like, well, how do you do that? And
Yeah.
so they like literally, I think I have like a vague memory of being at Hamilton Street Cafe in
Hmm.
Bound Brook, New Jersey, and
Yeah.
sitting down at like the merch table and getting explained like here's how you burn a silk screen and like how you use emulsion and all this stuff
Hmm.
um and that sort of like opened up my eyes a little bit more and the door to like, oh, you can design for this and you can do, X, Y, and Z, like using halftones or using whatever.
Sure.
And I can literally use that to then print stuff for my clothing company at the time. And so I started doing that. And then through the clothing company is how I met Zach West,
Hmm.
who's, our mutual friend.
Yeah.
And I I was sponsoring his band and other bands, giving them free merch and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
that has like literally kind of like interwoven between relationships and, different projects and things like that throughout the years.
Sure. So we're like when we talk about these early years of like creating stuff for music, which eventually we're going to springboard into because that's our topic for today. But how does that get you to NBDco? And because like your website is it's so much more than music now. I feel like first of all, your brand strategy and your case studies are beautiful, which is
Oh, thank you.
part of the reason what drew me to your work in the first place. But like yes, you have a broad portfolio of stuff. So where does that transition happen? Where now you're kind of functioning as like a full studio and maybe less as like an illustrator and a screen printer.
Yeah, so that kind of it came out of some of the downsides, I guess,
Hmm.
of working um, within the music industry. So for a while, I thought that like that was my path, and I was just
Hmm.
going to, um, you know, grow within there. And I think there is absolutely opportunity to do that.
Hmm.
But at the time, I was seeing, and I don't know if it still remains the same today, but I was seeing this like pattern where new designers were coming into the field and then literally like giving away designs and things like that for free or for 50 bucks or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to compete with when you have smaller bands and musicians that maybe don't have a budget for anything.
Sure.
And even record labels and stuff that I've worked with, typically the budgets are not super high.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, it got to a point where um, I love doing it so much, but I felt like I was almost like chasing payments and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I love the work itself. And I was like, well, how can I do more of this work that I love, but like maybe on a higher level or like a more consistent level,
Hmm.
where I feel like the time I'm putting into everything can be reciprocated in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And I started realizing, like, in a way, designing for bands, especially like doing repeat merchandise or branding for them or whatever, you're literally building a mini brand in a
Yeah.
way. And so I was like, well, I like the idea of like really like honing in and like creating a universe within this brand or this band, right?
Hmm.
And so I ended up getting jobs out of college that were I worked in the city for a little bit,
Hmm.
um, at a studio that was smaller, and it was more of like a brand design studio and packaging studio.
Sure.
And we did some work for like Chobani, 16 Handles, Apple, other stuff.
Sure.
And um, the nice thing about being at a small place was that you got to like try your hand at a whole bunch of different things because there weren't that many people to be able to like complete the project.
Hmm.
So I got to see quickly sort of like what I liked and what I didn't like. And um, the nice thing too was I was able to kind of connect that back to designing for bands because, you know, while you're designing for bands, if you're working within different genres, you're doing so much variation within there that you're like literally trying your hand at a whole bunch of different styles. So like in my case, when I literally did an internship and then ended up freelancing for like a subsidiary of Sony, which is called like Red Distribution.
Hmm.
Um, and so like I was designing stuff for like Liz Phair on one end,
Yeah.
but then on the other end, I was also designing for like when I was like freelancing on my own, um, like Victory Records or whatever, and like the bands that are like Emery or Motion City Soundtrack definitely have such a different point of view than
Yes.
something like a Liz Phair or whatever. And so it kind of made me feel like I was able to like adapt and create more of like a versatility in a way.
Hmm.
And I had a lot of fun doing that. And that made me think I can kind of connect this to working on brands and kind of creating what I felt like my connection point was like more of like a lifestyle brand through that connection to like band merch and all that. And to me, I feel like, like uh, merchandise in general, like t-shirt design or apparel design, whatever, you're kind of like a walking billboard in a way, right? Like,
Sure.
but it's the, I almost feel like it's like the least offensive version of advertising or
Yeah.
marketing, where you have to make the thing look cool, you have to make it appealing, and it has to like connect to the message and kind of be pure in that way.
Sure.
And that's kind of what I tried to bring into some of the brands that I was working with. Not saying that I'm doing things like totally different than others, but like that was sort of like the lens that I saw it through.
Hmm.
And from there on, I hopped to a couple of different studios and worked in a couple of different industries, like whether it was a studio that was more like web based, but did a little bit of branding,
Hmm.
or um, the last place that I worked at was more. They did a little bit of everything, but it was sort of like a manufacturing and a design studio, like all in one. So we did a lot of work for like the restaurant industry and retail stores and things like that, and then like really built up the branding and the sort of like building of a lifestyle brand within there. And that's sort of like what led me to NBDco because I felt like there was this opportunity that we maybe weren't taking advantage of, which was to like really hone in and like create that holistic space for a brand to exist and tie it back to the lifestyle point of view.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what I try to infuse in every project that we work on right now.
Yeah. And your portfolio is pretty broad. I would say, you're doing a lot of cool apparel design, and then you have a lot of stuff with like smaller startup businesses, which I think it lends itself to your experience in like almost like a generality because not only are you good at like illustrative work, which is amazing, from what I've seen,
Oh,
but yeah,
thank you.
your brand building and your identity design is really it's well thought out, and it really, like you said, like it gives you an opportunity to give each project a personality, which I think just comes from that experience that you were talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important to, I mean, especially nowadays, try to differentiate every project that you work on and like really hone in and find like what those values are that you can kind of bring to light. And I don't know, I feel like there is again another tie back to music where like you're taking the lyrics, which are almost like their values, and kind
Hmm.
of pulling those out and like creating something within there. So trying to use that as sort of like the foundation to jump off of and
Sure.
create something new.
Yeah. So I think this springboards us deeper into the topic that we're going to talk about. Like obviously we've kind of been poking around at this idea of like music design and where our start is with that. It comes from a deep love of just being really embedded in a local music scene. And I think for both of us that just comes from, New Jersey is just notorious for really good indie and punk rock bands, especially in our era of growing up. In like the late '90s to like early to mid 2000s, there was just a lot of really good small scenes, and whether that's New Brunswick and kind of the Rutgers like basement show scene, or a lot of these suburban towns. Like I grew up in Middletown, and like where Zach kind of was floating around, it was like a lot of like church basements and
Yeah,
VFW halls, and you really it kind of, when you're a teenager and you're looking for a sense of identity, that was, it was so almost like addictive, in a way, because it really was like
totally.
you felt like you were really a part of something. And like you said, all these bands, they have their own merch, and you're in a room with like 100 people just like sweating, and like your ears are ringing. There's something very addictive to that, and it really is like a gateway into like what we're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's so many people that I'm still friends with today that came out of that world, and just knowing different musicians and getting introduced to their friends or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's this weird interwoven web that sort of like for me kind of connects to so many things in life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really hard for a lot of people. I like, it's funny that this is the topic that we decided on, because it's such a like a fresh in my mind thing with a lot of people, where they're like, "Oh, I just really want to design for musicians." And I think, you have so much experience with that, and for you to come out and say, "Yeah, it's great." It's like, but it's unsustainable. I think it's hard. It's probably hard for a lot of people to swallow, but you know, through just knowing people in bands and like growing up in that scene, you're like, most musicians are pretty broke unless they're Liz Phair.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, this is like, it's, I think what, the what it all boils down to in this conversation is just like, it really is like, it's passion work. Like you have
for
to
sure.
sustain yourself as a graphic designer, and then, unless you have somebody like Dinosaur Jr. or somebody coming in and being like, "Hey, will you do like, full album artwork for us?" It's more for fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can definitely make, I would say some supplemental income off of it for sure.
Yeah.
And there are, like you said, there are certain bands that they really put everything into like their visual identity in a way where
Hmm.
like there's what is it, Dead and Co now is like huge on that, and
Hmm.
um, a couple of other bands I think like Under Oath is doing a lot of that as well, and like they're working with people who were great freelance band designers that now have started studios that are maybe like visual um, di- direction studios in a way, like
Sure.
whether it's like Invisible Creature or
Yeah.
their new project, which I think is like Mind Reader or something like that that they just came out with
Hmm.
recently,
Yeah, I just saw that.
which is super cool, and they do amazing work. And then I think Brandon Reich has another brand that's called like Tension Division, and
Hmm.
they do some really amazing art direction, whether it's like music video or merchandise lines and designs that carry into the album art. And so it's like a whole world experience, sort of.
Yeah.
Um, so that there is a world where that exists, and you can get into that. But I think that point from like where it starts to get to there, like you said, you have to believe in it and have a passion in it. And I think
Yeah.
to me, you know, that really helps in a way because that um, I don't know about you, but for me, I feel like my best work comes out of working with brands or bands or whoever
Hmm.
that I am really passionate about.
Yeah.
If I feel like I have a connection to this thing, I feel like I'm better attuned to design for it. And the work that comes out of it, I think we're all sort of like our worst enemies in terms of like judging our work.
Yes,
But
of course.
I think the work that comes out of it is ultimately more rewarding and just a better product.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely like, when I started doing this, I was looking at guys like Matt Dawson or even like Morning Breath, where I'm like, oh, like this is what I want to do.
Yeah,
But you start to realize very quickly that, especially like Morning Breath comes to mind, because I'm like, oh, these guys have been designing album artwork since they started being professional. So it's like there's a world where you have to be so lucky, and you have to be really talented, and you have to know the right people. And
yeah,
the reason why, like a lot of these places, like especially like them, Invisible Creature, like they just have a network that allows them to draw, and like referrals that come to them because of the work that they've done. And yeah, they really are, there's a very small circle of these designers that get to do this kind of stuff. And
absolutely.
unless you're in house, that's a different story. But yeah, it's a hard world to bridge into. So it really is like, when you get these clients like that come in and say, hey, we were recommended to you to do like some merch work or something, and it's like, it really does, like it's like electric, because you're like, wow, I love this musician or this band or this brand, and I get to kind of put my stamp on this. It's really it does kind of, it dictates a much higher energy and more passionate work comes out of it, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like you kind of touched on, the like relationship aspect of it is so important, and that kind of ties back into like the community.
Hmm.
And through just knowing some people that are in that space, you get opened up to a whole, you know, different point of view on what you can do and who you can do it for. And, you get to kind of like see, or kind of dip your toe in, I guess is the right way to say it, and say like, hey, I might be able to, offer something up, or I might be able to make a connection here, because I met this person at this show or this thing, and
Yeah,
I think I really have like a take on this that they could really like or whatever, and it can open up the door.
totally.
Hey guys, Nick here. We're super pumped to share that we are partnering with Wix Studio, a platform that makes web design seamless for visual creatives who'd rather design than debug. Let's talk about that little magic that we chase, movement that feels alive. With Wix Studio, you can bring that magic to your client site or to your own site using mouse parallax. It's a seamless way to add motion that reacts to every scroll, tilt, or hover. Think depth, think immersion, think giving your flat layouts a little dose of 3D. But here's the best part, you're not coding this. There's no script to write, no plugin to hack. It's built right into the editor. You control how elements move as visitors move their mouse. Want a background image to shift slightly while the logo glides to the other direction? Done. Why does this matter? Because in a world where everyone's skimming so fast, movement holds attention. It's a powerful way to guide a user's eye and create a modern, elevated experience that says, this was made by a pro. So if you want to add this interactive touch without adding hours to your timeline, mouse parallax in Wix Studio is your new trick. You've got the design eye, Wix Studio helps bring it to life. Check it out at wixstudio.com. Now, back to our episode.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the people that you've worked with, if you don't mind, and
Sure.
then, what those projects have been like for you. It's like, just like some highlights of your favorites, and then what does that look like now? Like, has that springboarded you into like a more consistent work, or do you feel like maybe you've taken your foot off the gas a bit and you just take stuff that really is like interesting to you? Like, just like because I think it's important because you have a lot of experience with this, and I think it's good for people to hear kind of like, where it started and like how it's progressing into like your
Yeah.
current work.
So, where it started was really like local bands, kind of like I was saying a little earlier with like the AIM gifts and all that stuff.
Sure.
That then transitioned into like doing some merch design for local bands. And then that transitioned into being able to freelance a little bit, seeing like, oh, like these designs that I sold to or that I gave away for free or whatever it might have been at
Hmm.
the time, um, to this band are really selling well. Like I think people like what I'm making. Maybe I can sell it to people I don't know.
Sure.
And so that came through reaching out to like band managers and things like that. And through doing that, I was able to, I think it started off with like some smaller record labels, and management companies. And so I think, I'm trying to think what maybe my first like larger band that I worked with was Every Time I Die.
Nice. That's
And
awesome.
that was a cool one for me
Yeah,
because I was a big fan, and I still am a big fan. Unfortunately, they're not around anymore. But
I know. Sad.
yeah, yeah,
What an
they went
explosive career to come back with an album
exactly.
after so long and then to be like, okay, we're done.
Yeah, yeah, and it was
Yeah.
a messy ending,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But it's also kind of like totally makes sense for them.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I got to work on, uh, I think it was something for like one of their European tours for them,
Hmm.
and through doing that, um, I think one of the management companies, for a band, had reached out for me to do. I think it was for like Roadrunner Records, this band called Bleecker Ridge.
Hmm.
Um, so I did a couple of designs for them, and then I think somebody from Victory Records had reached out, so I did some stuff for The Sleeping,
Hmm.
um, and Emery,
Okay.
which was pretty fun to work on for Emery.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think maybe like the biggest band that I ended up working with, was Motion City Soundtrack, and
Yeah.
um, that one I think also kind of just like came through somebody seeing my portfolio, essentially, their manager, and he had reached out and asked if I could do something that was specifically related to like a song lyric. And
Sure.
through that, I ended up doing, I think, like four designs total for them, which was fun. The one that I think I'm like kind of psyched on the most in a way ended up being for their farewell tour. And
Yeah.
then now they're back, but
Yeah.
like years later they're back. But it was fun to kind of be a part of that in some sort of way.
Totally.
Um, and yeah, so I through there, there have always been like the ties back to local, which has
Hmm.
been nice. So working with Zach and Athletics, which they just came out with their album today, which was awesome to hear.
Yeah. I was just listening to it on
Um,
the way over, actually, to the
yeah,
studio.
nice.
It's really
That's
good.
how I started off my day as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's an amazing album.
Hmm.
And they've always been amazing to work with as well. So back around the time that I was like sponsoring them,
Hmm.
I was doing like a merch design here and there for them, and then that's kind of carried till today, which is nice. Whereas like I think last year when they went to China for the first time,
Hmm.
I was able to design some merch for them for that tour.
Yeah.
And I think one piece that's coming out maybe later for this new album release. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, it's kind of like carried through, the local and like the community has kind of carried through all of it. And it's like you kind of said, like that's all like related back to like passion, I think. And um, I don't know, it just ends up being a lot more fun for me, because those are like sometimes the most open-ended projects in a way where like you kind of have the the floor to say like I want to do X, Y, and Z and like really try at it. And
Sure.
sometimes you don't get those opportunities when working with other brands.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things that you were talking about was that you just kind of have to put yourself out there, right? It really is. It's not easy. But it's part of business development. And maybe like when you're younger, you don't realize you're networking, but that is kind of what you're doing.
Yeah,
When you go to those shows and you're meeting bands, and then some of those bands make it out of their local scenes, and then they get signed to record labels, and then their managers see your work, and they kind of carry you through like the years of experience. Like, yeah, I don't like it really like the biggest thing. And like for me this is very new because I've only been doing this for a few years. I feel like you've got a much broader sense of like how this works and how to navigate it, but it is a lot of cold emailing or just shaking hands at shows for people that like maybe you would be uncomfortable talking to, or yeah, just being a little shameless about promoting your merch or whatever that is. And that also plays into social media, and making sure you're tagging the bands. Like if you're doing even if you're just doing artwork for yourself,
yeah,
it is quite a bit of just putting it out there and a lot of crickets, and then maybe like a few people come back and say, hey, this was cool, the band wants to use it for something. Or yeah, I don't know, like what do you think about that?
yeah. I mean, the social part is like what I latched onto for for like recent stuff. I feel like that's where I like dropped off, and that's where I made a big mistake in a way,
Hmm.
like social media.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, like you don't realize at the time you are networking in a way. Like you're trying to make friends, or you're just trying to tell somebody like, hey, that was awesome. Like I loved seeing that, or like hearing you.
Yeah.
Um, but it ends up fostering this relationship that ends up being a little bit of networking. And
Yeah.
um, like the best example of that for me is really Zach, like we were saying, through athletics, you know, designing merch for them, to, designing for Zach's other band, Zachary West and the Good Grief,
Yeah.
um, as well as then bridging that gap into designing for his brand, Sheer Revival,
Sure.
um, was all sort of like a connective bridge. And through there, I was then able to meet Mike from Relic
Yeah.
and, develop that relationship. And now, Relic Music is an awesome store in Red Bank. And, you know, like really one person in my case, in that example, created so many different opportunities, that I'm super thankful for,
Hmm.
um, and introduced me to so many different people that, you know, different situations and instances come up, and
Yeah.
you're able to, you know, try your hand at a couple different things, and if you do good work, good work comes from that. And I definitely believe in that. And unfortunately for me, like the social media part that I was bringing up before is like where I drop off, because
Hmm.
I was never a super um, big person to promote my work. Definitely have always been the mindset of like, I like the work when I make it, and then when I put it out there, I give me like a week or two, and then I'm
Hmm.
bummed about it. I'm like,
Sure.
I should have done this, I should have done that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm beating myself up about it.
Yeah.
And um, because of that, I think I don't post a ton on social media, and I never like hopped on early to like really promote myself in that regard. And I didn't realize that it kind of is just the digital form of the networking, like you were saying, in person. And I think that, a lot of people, especially younger people, realize that so much more now, and they're putting stuff out there immediately and getting
Mm-hmm.
that response and kind of building their brand in terms of like what they do as a designer, which is great. But yeah, sometimes you forget, you know, you also have to advocate for yourself a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And the social media landscape has even changed since I've come into it. And it used to just be, especially with Instagram, it was such a great place to put a portfolio of work that maybe, if you don't have experience building a website, you're like, well, this is easy because I can just put my stuff here. And there's a lot of visibility. Whereas now I feel like the market has shifted and it's become a lot more like performative based, where I feel
Yeah.
like people are kind of dancing for their work, and I'm like, that's just not, it's not my vibe. And I feel like a lot of people our age or older are kind of the same way. They're like, it's not what it used to be, and I'm not a bit, you're a bit of a curmudgeon, and you're like, I just don't want to. It's too much energy. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it
yeah,
literally could be its own job to
a hundred
like
percent.
to put it. I mean, it is for bigger brands and stuff like that, but as like a designer, just to like prep files and art and make case studies that are just for
Yeah,
social, like it's kind of its own day job in a way,
it is. Yeah.
and it's a for me it's a bummer because I never really enjoy doing it, and I know it helps on some level, but then at the same point in time, um, like I was saying, like through having that personal network and having good word of mouth, um, for the work that you do, you still end up getting more work in return. Obviously, you probably put yourself in better footing when you're promoting on all
Hmm.
aspects.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I never could get into like doing like the voiceovers to talk through, different reasoning for doing X, Y, and Z or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I even had a discussion with Zach a while ago too, where he was saying like, you could easily do like for all the sheer revival labels, like just a reel or whatever that is based on like, hey, this is the reasoning that like led us to this
Mm.
design and this pattern or this geometric whatever, that ended up being the label design for there, because everything has reasoning and there's like stories built into everything.
Of course. Yeah.
It's just to put that all together for 20 different labels and all that. It's just like I see the work ahead of me and I'm like, I would rather just be designing something new, you
I hear
know?
you. I'm the same way. It's, when you finish a project, the last thing you want to do is go back and say, oh, how do I now display this in a way that's aesthetically pleasing for non-designers to look at and say, hey, I could use this person for
Yeah.
work. And it's hard with music stuff too, because especially if it's a merch design, it's like I did one illustration or something for a T-shirt. How do I
Yeah.
extrapolate that out in a way that makes sense, And it's like, what are you gonna do? Build a bunch of extra content? It's annoying.
Yeah, exactly. And so many things are tied back to overall aesthetics too, of like, build your grid in this sort of way or whatever. And it's like, if you're designing for one piece of merch, where does that fit in all this stuff? And,
Yeah,
it's a whole thing.
I've started now more recently because I'm like, yeah, it's nice to have purpose when I do this, because now it's so funny. I did a case study talk last week for AIGA,
Oh,
and
nice.
yeah, but we were talking about like case studies. To me, like I think what you have on your website is fantastic, and
Thank you.
I wish I had the time to sit down and build that out. But I almost like the way I treat Instagram is like they're mini case studies. And yeah, it's like if I do a shirt for Sheer Revival for Zach, or if I'm doing something for a band, I'm like, okay, I can make this look the best it needs to look in 3 panels. That's kind of like,
Yeah.
so it's like the constraints of it work for me in that way, where I'm like, it's not really a case study because I'm not going through the motions of like really explaining everything out, but I'm like, it is in a way building like almost like a snack version of that, where it's like, okay, yeah, it was just one shirt, but I can maybe, generate some artwork that flexes some other muscles where I'm like, okay, I'm working in Photoshop. I can make some scenery or backdrop, or a setting shot or something that makes this like kind of highlights it and pulls people in to maybe look at some close-ups of just the shirt, which is really
Yeah.
all it is. It's just a t-shirt, but like yeah, I'm like, okay, like that to me is like a more palatable way to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think I saw you do it recently for the poster that you did
Hmm.
for Zachary West and the Good Grief,
Yeah.
which I thought was really cool too.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's funny because I was reading an article about AI on the way over here and how it's like going to destroy a bunch of jobs, and I'm like, yeah, that's scary. I'm like, but I use it to build scenery and stuff. And I don't need it, and I don't think you would either. Like you could easily Photoshop something similar if you really wanted to, but it saves a lot of time when I'm like, oh, like I
Yeah.
need a backdrop to kind of display this poster, and I don't have to go through and find 75 images to
Yeah.
collage together. But yeah, that's the workflow of it that's made it more fun for me because I'm like, okay, I get to design more content for this project that maybe was just like a one-off thing, and it makes it like there's a little bit more passion behind it as opposed to like just being like, oh god, I got to sit down and write out stuff for a case study and make like diagrams and infographics and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, formulating a case study is a ton of work, and
yeah,
yeah, I feel the same way. I kind of dread doing it,
hmm,
and when I have to do it, I really try to put everything I can into it. But man, it takes so much time and so much effort to try to really like communicate visually and verbally, why this is the way that it is, and how to take it from this to that, or
yeah,
how it evolved in this sort of way, or where it started from, or whatever.
sure,
And yeah, I think little things like that, like you were saying, trying to like distill it down to something that's a micro case study or a mini case study
yeah,
is a cool take on it.
yeah. And I think it's especially good for music stuff because when you really only have like one piece or something that's going into it, it gives you like first of all a location to put it that's accessible for people that aren't just in your professional network. And I don't know, it just makes it, I think bands just like, especially like a lot of times they're pushing stuff off to managers or agents or whatever, and they want to just send them something quick where they're like, oh, take a look at this, like I screenshotted this like this one tile from whatever, and we're like, we like this, we want to like maybe use them for something. Like I think it just makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's funny that like Zach is kind of our one degree of separation because the same way he has kind of helped foster like some of your like client work, it's been the same for me.
Yeah,
And it's nice when you have somebody that it springs out of this music scene but also is such like a like holistic visionary where he has like sheer revival and he understands the idea like things need to look good, and he's
yeah,
like when he refers you to other people it feels good because you're like, oh, this person understands kind of that there is like aesthetic benefits to having like good design, and you know he wants other people to have access to that as well.
absolutely. And it's funny because there are so many different people like that within I feel like within the music industry as well. So like
Mm.
even if we go back to the most recent show that we just went to, which was his band's,
Yeah.
well, I don't know about your most recent show, but
No, I
for
think
me,
that was me as well. Yeah, that was my most recent show. Yeah.
so um, I had spoken to him afterwards and said something like, it's crazy to think like how many different people were in that space that are all doing so many different creative things within the community. So like
Yeah.
one of my friends was there, Alex Flannery. He does
Yeah.
a lot of the work for Mercy Union.
Hmm.
And Mercy Union, I have a tie to as well from Rocky, who's their guitarist. Used to be in another band called Kick Over the Traces,
Hmm.
who was one of the bands that I did the first like background, AIM bullshit that I was doing
Yeah.
early on.
Sure.
um, and so like little people like that like we're all sort of connected in these weird sort of ways. And, I ended up working with Alex at my last job as well.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and also there was Dan King, and Dan King is a musician who also does graphic design, also does great design for the Gaslight Anthem and other bands like that.
Yeah.
So like for Mercy Union, Jared Hart is Alex's version of like somebody like Zach West is to us.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how there are people like that like are these sort of like visionaries in a way that like they see a better way to do things, or like, hey, these people's style matches with what I see for our band or our brand or whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And they really like connect the dots and really, kind of make things happen and introduce people and open up different opportunities that, are pretty incredible.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say now I've kind of, no, I wouldn't say figured out, but I'm starting to kind of figure out the sauce of like, okay, what's my recipe for like trying to get more band work? But Zach really was like the kickstart for that, because if it weren't for him, I never would have worked with the Wonder Years, who's like one of my favorite bands. And I think Dan Campbell, he played at the show,
Yeah,
he's another guy that's just got a really good eye for like a visual aesthetic for that band. And
absolutely.
as they've grown, yeah, their merch rollouts always align with the album release or the show, that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I just feel like they're really another one that is really good at curating specific artwork and knowing who to ask to find what they're looking for.
Yeah, and them as well. Here's another weird connection. So Paul Granese does
Hmm.
most of their work, and Paul's from Philly,
Hmm.
and I've known him through the digital world since before like social media. It was like MTs, which was like a t-shirt
Yeah.
website,
Yeah.
and him and I had connected through there years back, and we were both basically just posting band merch that we were making at the time, and so
Hmm.
those like little connections are really fun to see. And he kills it at Cold Cuts merch, and
Yeah.
I think he started his own thing recently, as well, which is really cool to
Hmm.
see. But yeah, there are these people like you were saying, like Dan is one of those people that like if you think of the Wonder Years, you have a vision of what their merch looks like. It is like a cohesive ecosystem in a way.
Yeah.
And that, in a sense, is kind of related back to, I think, what I was saying too, where it's like it's its own brand, and you can take that and extrapolate that and apply that to like whether it's the corporate world or whether it's, a small startup or whatever, and kind of try to maybe emulate some of that passion that goes into that and bring it
Totally.
into the new thing.
Yeah. So now, like, okay, I feel like we've kind of hit a lot of highlights of this, but I think there are downsides to this as well, where, we talked about, sometimes you end up working with musicians that maybe they like stiff you for the bill, or like,
Yeah.
another side of that is, bands like the Wonder Years or Mercy Union who have kind of almost like an in-house creative who's a friend. It's hard to bridge that gap when they're like, we're good. We have somebody that does all our stuff and we really like it. So I think there are things that can be frustrating about this work as well, where it is a bit hard to kind of wedge your way into some of these circles.
Oh yeah, for sure. And now with access to, so many different things, especially through social media, you can
Yeah.
just DM a band or whatever, a, the member of that band that has their own personal Instagram or whatever.
Hmm.
It's even hard to stand out on some level too, because
Sure.
there are so many people doing the same kind of thing, um, and it's hard to get in that space, like you were saying.
Yeah.
For me, I think a lot of the downside, which is like I kind of mentioned earlier on, that like led me to kind of like not part ways, but like to kind of like look at a different industry as like maybe that's where I can kind of create something more stable.
Hmm.
Really came down to like the budgetary sort of like issues, and I know um, there were times like working with record labels that like they were paying out like net 90, which is like 90 days after you're done.
Yeah.
And then 90 days comes and you're like, I didn't get a check.
Yeah.
Where's my check? Now I got to check in with them. And then they're like, oh, somebody didn't process it or whatever. So now you got to wait an extra 30 days or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. And like, we're like, at the end of the day, you're like, I mean, I'm looking for $300 here. Like
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
I need to pay rent, or I need to, to pay my mortgage or whatever that may
Yeah.
be. And, um, you know, chasing $300 for for a couple of months is
Yeah.
not
It's a pain
fun.
in the ass. And
Yeah.
even like a lot of times I found, you know, I don't know about you, but like I have a like contract that I make, like for most of my branding work, I make people sign, but a lot of these band managers are like, no, we don't do that. And I'm like, so now I have
Yeah.
to like trust you on word of mouth and just like an email chain that you're going to fulfill
Yep.
payment. And
Yeah.
I was just working with somebody recently, and I didn't even know that the payment had come through. I had to check my bank statement to see that like they had Zelled it over, and it's like, yeah, I mean, okay, cool, I got paid, and it was like I will say, pretty quick after the turnaround of the work, but you are kind of like, whoa, this feels so lax in a way that's like not the norm, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the Wild West in a way
Yeah.
where anything and anything can happen, whether
Yeah.
it's a late payment or an early payment, or because there's some bands that might pay everything up front too,
Yeah,
because
that's true.
especially if they have a relationship with you.
Yeah.
Um, but there are definitely instances where I know from just being friends with people in bands where there were people that um, were maybe a hard designer to work with, that I had heard another band just, took the JPEG that they had sent and like took that to the print shop. And like,
Yeah.
there's stuff like that that happens where like people aren't getting paid, and,
Yeah.
you know, things happen. And then there's, the instances where, hey, I know we said 250, but like, can it, be 150 instead, or, like
Hmm.
some sort of weird thing like that where, there's no guarantee because nobody wants to sign a contract because everything is like moving
Yeah.
and in motion. And, now we don't have a budget because our van's tire blew out and we got to pay
Right.
for a new tire, or, the band's merch got, not merch, the band's equipment got stolen. So we don't have the money anymore. Like
Yeah.
stuff like that is just always happening, unfortunately.
I had a band I was designing a full album cover for, and they broke up in the middle of
Ooh.
the design process. And
Oh
then
no.
they like, thankfully, like they retooled, and they're finishing the album, but then they just decided to go in a completely different art direction. So I'm like,
Oh wow.
got paid the deposit, and then it just never came to fruition, which it happens. You're right though, like this world is chaotic and people should know that, which is why this is a good conversation, because young designers need to know, like, if you think your life is chaotic as a graphic designer, fold in now musicians on top of that, who are great people but sometimes incredibly unreliable. And I say that with love, but
Yeah.
you know, it's just the way that it works.
Yeah, yeah, and you never know what the disconnect could be. It could be between the musicians, it could be between the musicians and their manager or management or their record label. Like
Hmm.
all sorts of different things happen in between, and different people take the lead on different things. And um, you know, th that's why I think there are some of these bands that you see that have that like really great style, and that sort of like
Hmm.
consistency of what they put out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes back to like communication and like who, like clearly defined roles of like who's doing what, and how they can sort of like work together. And that all comes through, years of experience. So like if
Yeah.
you're working with a new band, good luck because that is hard to come by.
Yeah. Well, and as recently as last week, I was talking to a band, and they were like, they just put out a new record, and I was like, hey, we were chatting on Instagram, and they were just like, we have no cash. Like all of our money went into the record. If we're maybe interested, but like the best we can do is maybe a trade for. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Because I'm like, sometimes you are in that space where you're like, yeah, I just want to do it, and who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
I get like some concert tickets or a record out of it or something, and that's
Yeah.
enough. But you do have to expect that, especially working with smaller musicians or mid-level, like it's not always going to be like the payday that you think it's going to be.
Yeah. And I've had early on, I've had some funny conversations or like some responses to things where like somebody's interested in buying a design or something, and then
Hmm.
I tell them the price, and then they're like, "Oh, for that price, I'll just do it myself." And you're like, "Okay."
Yeah,
Like,
right. Yeah,
all right, you
you
don't
get that a
have
lot too.
250 bucks or 300 bucks,
Right.
okay,
It's
and you
like,
just want to do it yourself now. Cool.
yeah, which is fine, like go, have at it. But I think you see the success of bands like, the Wonder Years or even like the early November. A lot of these bands that came out of this East Coast scene, and like they really have persisted because they're good at like the business side of stuff, and that is part like the aesthetic and design management is a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But all right. So now, like, we boiled it down. Like, at the end of it, if somebody, like, if a young designer came to you and said, like, I really want to work in the music industry, like, this is my passion, like, what would you say go for it? Or would you tell them to, like, maybe be more cautious about it?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think, like we were saying, if you're passionate about it,
Hmm.
go for it because early on in your career, it's hard to make money at anything. So
Yeah.
like if you can do it and you can put your own spin on it and you're not just, you know, pushing pixels for
Yeah.
somebody else,
Sure.
I think it's worth it to explore and kind of like try to develop your own style through it or see your vision through.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that I would kind of say, but also on the other end of that, be a little cautious and make sure you don't get stepped all over because
Yeah.
there are companies, there are managers, there are people that um, definitely hold empty promises, and you also don't want to make sure you're a doormat for
Yeah.
any of these people too.
I feel like we could come back and have an another hour conversation about just structuring your business model for this type of work, and maybe we will,
Yeah,
because like I think there's so much more good tidbits of advice to give, like on the money making side of it. But I think everything you said is fair, and I agree with. Yeah, but are you good to move into our wrap up questions and kind of tie a bow on this?
sure.
All
Yeah,
right.
that sounds good.
Cool. All right. So, I do the same thing with all the people that I interview. It's three questions. We go through, and yeah, you just give your most honest answers.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. So, question one: what's a piece of career advice you would give a younger version of yourself?
I think the thing that maybe would resonate with me more is like lean into your style and like what you like to create
Hmm.
rather than trying to design to kind of fit a different mold or something like that.
Totally.
um and definitely like we were talking about before, like wrapped in with that is like don't be afraid to promote it. If you're not promoting it, nobody knows you're doing it, or that it's even tied back to you.
Hmm.
And everybody hates that moment where you have to like post the thing and say like here, here's this great story behind it or whatever.
Yeah.
And it sucks in that regard, at least for me, but
Hmm.
don't be afraid to do it because that will ultimately open up different doors and lead to new things.
100%. Yeah, that's great advice. All right. Question two: what's a piece of career advice someone gave you that kind of helped you propel forward and achieve your goals as a professional?
Um, I think like two things come to mind.
Yeah.
One thing is years back, I went to the brand new conference. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
familiar with it.
totally.
Okay, awesome. One of my favorite conferences, just because of like the level of design studio and like brand design that
Hmm.
happens there.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the studios, and I can't remember if it was Snask or if it was Grand Army, and it might have been both. I think it was both.
Okay.
But their sort of like underlying message was like, in order to get started and to, make it to become where they're at now, which is, super high level designers or
Yeah.
design studios, um, you kind of have to fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And that's just what it is. So, it sucks to like feel like this isn't a real project or whatever, but like this kind of goes back to the passion thing that we were talking about, where like if you are truly passionate about whatever it is, if it's designing for musicians or bands or whatever, design what you think their merch should look like, or whatever that may be. Design a collection, if you want to brand it or whatever, and use that to propel the work that you're looking for, because that's essentially what these great studios did. And I think Grand Army's version of that was like they put on their website a version of like the USPS's um, updated branding, which was like something they wanted to do, I believe. And then I think they ended up doing that years
Yeah.
later, um, if I'm remembering correctly. And were actually paid to like, it wasn't a rebrand, but it was like to streamline some of their stuff in the stores.
Sure.
But like doing passion projects like that, where you see an opportunity that like, this band is doing stuff, but like they have zero merch. Like maybe I can design something for like what I see fit there. I can also pitch it to them. If it happens and it doesn't work out, that's fine. But like
Right.
if I'm really proud of this work, you know, put it up on the website, showcase it, and say it's for concept. But
Hmm.
um, if you don't make it, you're not bringing in the work that you're hoping to bring in at the end
Right.
of the day.
Yeah, you have to show people that you can do it. That's like really,
Exactly.
yeah. Otherwise, you're just telling people, "Oh, I can do this kind of work." It's like, well, show me what you got, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And people forget, unfortunately, that people don't remember that, or maybe they don't even think that like you're available or something like that. So like
totally.
doing something that creates a little bit of a repetition to like show I'm capable of doing this still, or this is something that I still love doing, whatever
Yeah,
that is, I think is important. And then the other thing that's kind of like in tandem with that in a way,
yeah.
um, again at Brand New, John Contino spoke years back too,
Hmm.
and I think his message was basically like, don't try to emulate anybody else. Like, be your own sense of weird. So like lean into what your weird style is, and like, don't worry about anybody else's. Like, you
Yeah,
might draw people in a certain way, and maybe you don't love it, but like, lean in and keep going at it and refining it, because that's ultimately what separates you from everybody else, and eventually, creates a style that you can be proud of.
yeah. That's no, it's great advice. And I think it's so important to really lean into what you love, because that's what makes you unique from everyone else. It's hard because you do see a lot of younger designers that are like, oh, I want to be like this studio or this studio. And it's like, yes, okay, you want to tailor your work so that maybe people like this will recognize you and give you a job. Awesome. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for personal identity, and especially with like music stuff, and you want these bands to recognize you as an individual, you have to bring something to the table that's yours. You can't bring somebody else's
Yeah.
work, you know, because they'll say, oh, well, we'll just hire that person. Or they'll say, this looks like everything else, we've done 10 years ago or something. It's like you have to give, they want something new. They want something that matches their aesthetic, but ultimately they want something that's unique. And like they're almost in a way they're commissioning artwork. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So totally. All right. Last question. What is the next level for you? And I frame that in a way that it could be your career, it could be personal life, it could be you want to read 20 books this year. Just like what's on the docket for you?
Really, I think kind of diving in deeper with NBDco. So NBDco is my, full-time thing now,
Hmm.
which has been great for the past 5 years, and it's sort of like slowly building, which is nice.
Yeah.
Um, but the big thing on the docket really is a new website, and that comes with new case studies, which I've been dreading a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to dive in a little deeper, get into some new spaces with some new brands and things like that,
Hmm.
and kind of expand the world out. I really love doing work for like the local community in some sort of way. So
Yeah.
like trying to make sure that there's like an incentive for a little bit of that as well, so that it's not just, you know, um, maybe like mid-level sort of like VC backed company, and maybe more of
Yeah.
like startup from New Jersey that has passion behind something.
Yeah. I think your portfolio really does have a nice mix of all that stuff,
Thank you.
which is good. I mean, it's important. You got to get paid at the end of the day, but it is sometimes nice to be able to invest back in a place that you love. And especially like, you know, Central Jersey is such like I feel like in a way, it is really tight. And it's nice to be able, like, if you have businesses that you love that eventually, want to work with you, or like, you get word of mouth recs, like, especially like Relic, like, it's a beautifully designed aesthetic and it matches the vibe of that store so well. And I think it's so cool for, especially for you to be able to be like, you know, when they do their anniversary shows or whatever, and you can go in there and see it and be like, damn, I put my heart and soul into this and it really shows.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super rewarding, and it's awesome to then be, you know, in a space like that, and then even meet somebody like you, or
Yeah.
I've met so many different people at Relic, and again, all tied back through music, which I think is just really great. And there are so many different like passion projects within there that um, there are tons and tons of new opportunities to maybe even just have a discussion and help somebody out, or point somebody in the right direction of like, if you're looking for this, you should go to this person for that, or
Yeah.
whatever, and kind of help each other out, because we're all like, everybody that has a passion within, I think designers are super passionate, musicians are super passionate, and some brands, especially startups, are super passionate.
Yeah.
And so like if you can find a way to link that passion back and kind of connect the dots and make things happen,
Hmm.
I think it's really great. And then to see it all kind of happening and unfolding in front of your eyes and impacting the community is even better.
Yeah. Totally. All right. So now that we're done with those, is there anything you want to plug before we dip out of here?
Yeah, I think it would probably be the website,
Hmm.
NBDco.com, NBDco at, well, I guess at NBDco underscore on Instagram. And then I guess I would say the new Athletics album. I think it's really great. Check it out on Spotify.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess for us, you can find us at DGDC Pod at pretty much everything. That's the handle for a lot of our socials. And if you want me specifically, or you want to ask a question on Instagram, you can hit me up at tloro underscore design. And yeah, I also recommend the Athletics record. It's really good. If you like kind of "This Will Destroy You" or like explosions in the sky kind of feel, like it's got those kind of vibes to it, with lyrics obviously. And yeah, I would say get out there and just find your passion with bands and really like lean in. And if you have any questions, like, I mean, I don't know how you feel, but reach out. Like, there's a
Yeah,
lot of experience between the both of us, and it never hurts. I always say, like, there's no stupid questions, and if you don't get a response, you don't get a response, but just ask. Reach out to us through social media, through our websites. Like, we are more than happy to offer advice.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Always happy to help.
Yeah, amazing. This was great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll catch up. We'll have to brainstorm for our next episode.
That would be great. I'd love to.
All right, perfect. All right, man. I'll catch
Awesome.
you later.
It's great seeing you.
Yeah.